When disaster strikes, the first responsibility of emergency managers and local officials is to protect lives and public health. Communities should also take emergency protective measures to reduce the immediate threat of significant damage to improved public or private property through cost-effective measures. These activities may include sandbagging, barricading, sheltering, search and rescue, and the dissemination of public information. Since disasters come in different forms, both natural and man-made, responding to each disaster presents its own unique set of challenges. The response effort may require the full attention of first responders and local officials before, during, and immediately after the disaster occurs. However, as soon as possible, your local jurisdiction should start a coordinated, thorough damage assessment of public infrastructure. While separate assessments should be conducted for individuals, homes, and businesses, this presentation will focus on assessing public infrastructure and the cost of emergency protective measures and debris removal. These costs may qualify for assistance under the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Public Assistance Program if a federal disaster is declared. My name is Bill Boone, Program Specialist and Team Lead in FEMA's Region 6 Public Assistance Program. Today, we will learn about the process for conducting preliminary damage assessments. The initial damage assessment will be conducted by local officials and will be used to notify state counterparts of the extent of damages, the costs, the impacts, and the community's ability to recover from the event. State and tribal leaders will use the information gathered from local damage assessments to determine whether or not the governor should make a request to the Federal Emergency Management Agency or FEMA for joint preliminary damage assessments, or PDAs. The joint PDA is the mechanism used to determine the impact and magnitude of damage and the resulting unmet needs of individuals, businesses, the public sector, and the community as a whole. A joint PDA will include a local official, a state or tribal official, and the official from FEMA, as well as other needed technical advisors. The results of joint PDAs are compiled and analyzed at the state and tribal level as well as at the FEMA regional level. Information collected is used by the state or tribal government as a basis for the governor's request to the president for a federal disaster declaration, and by FEMA to document the recommendation made to the president in response to the governor's request. There are certain per capita thresholds updated annually that are taken into account when analyzing PDA data. If the president approves a request for a federal disaster declaration, FEMA may provide reimbursement to the communities through its public assistance program. This presentation is designed to teach you what information local leaders should collect during an initial damage assessment to be thoroughly prepared for a joint PDA with senior state, tribal, and FEMA officials. You need to know what was the damage and how extensive the damage was. You will want to know the status of essential public services such as water, sewer, and utility services. Can emergency vehicles reach all areas of your jurisdiction? Are school bus routes open? Were publicly owned buildings damaged? In order to answer these questions, someone must physically survey all areas where there might have been damage. The people responsible for damage assessment should be identified in advance of your emergency management plan and should be updated periodically. Damage assessment team members should be trained before disaster strikes. To accomplish this, local jurisdictions will want to take advantage of training offered by state, tribal nation, and FEMA. No two situations are exactly the same when it comes to assessing public property damage. Flood damage, which primarily affects road systems and water control facilities, differs from tornado damage, which consists primarily of scattered debris and downed power lines. Hurricane may cause both flood and wind damage. In order to effectively approach the damage assessment process, there are several pieces of information you should know in advance, such as what type of damage is eligible and what applicants are eligible. There are 7 categories of work that are eligible for reimbursement under FEMA's Public Assistance Program. These categories are Category A, debris removal. Category B, emergency protective measures such as sandbagging, search and rescue, and security patrols. Category C, road systems such as streets, bridges, and culverts. Category D, water control facilities such as levees and dams. Category E, buildings and equipment. Category F, public utility systems such as water and sewer plants or electrical stations and lines. Category G, other facilities such as parks, golf courses, and airports. Applicants who are eligible under the Public Assistance Program are state and local governments, tribal governments, and certain private nonprofit organizations. Private nonprofit organizations or PNPs own or operate nonprofit facilities and have an effective ruling from the Internal Revenue Service or from the state certifying that they are a nonprofit organization. Eligible PNP facilities provide either a critical or essential government service. Examples of PNPs that provide critical services are emergency or medical facilities, educational facilities, utility facilities, and custodial care facilities. Other organizations that provide essential governmental service may also be eligible for some reimbursement. Some examples are libraries, museums, community centers, homeless shelters, and senior citizens' homes. Now that you know the categories of work or damage and who might be eligible applicant, let's look at the procedures for assessing public property damage. During the response phase, emergency activities are taking place and information is being shared. In particular, the Emergency Operations Center gathers information from fire, police, and public works personnel as well as the general public. Some of this information will include the location of damages and records of emergency work. As emergency activities are completed, the information gathered regarding costs related to the damages and to the emergency work should be used to develop a strategy for conducting local assessments. The pre-identified damage assessment teams should assess all areas of damage using the techniques you are learning today. Damages should be prioritized so that the worst and most costly damages are seen first. Before heading to the field, teams should receive direction from their local coordinator regarding the areas that each team should visit and what damages to expect. This will allow the teams to review all damage areas in a short amount of time without duplicating each other's efforts. Whenever possible, the local damage assessment team should review damages that most relate to their area of expertise. For an example, an engineer might be the best person to assess a washed-out bridge. While each town, district, or precinct is responsible for surveying its area of responsibility, your local emergency management plan should identify who or what office will be responsible for collection of this information for evaluation and reporting purposes. The local team members responsible for assessing damages should be equipped with cameras to record the damages and the GPS devices to record the location of damage. Damage sites should be supported by photographs. The photographs should be labeled in such a way that someone not familiar with the damage can match a photo to the written description of the site. It is also important to take photographs in the immediate aftermath of the event. It may take as long as 1 to 2 weeks before the joint PDA team arrives. By then, some emergency repairs may have been made, which could make it difficult for an assessor to determine the extent and impact of the damage. Having photos from the immediate aftermath will document what the facility looked like before any repairs were begun. In addition, team members should have at their disposal annotated maps identifying damaged areas. As more damages are discovered, team members should add this information on the maps to be prepared for the joint PDAs with a state and FEMA specialist. Necessary office supplies such as clipboard, tablet, and writing instruments. Communication device. A cell phone, or if cellular service is interrupted, a radio. Spare batteries for digital equipment. Safety equipment or specialized clothing such as rain gear or a shirt with your jurisdiction's logo. Safety is an important factor to consider when conducting damage assessments. Avoid standing on the edge of any type of washout as scouring may have eroded the surface beneath the roadway, leaving it vulnerable to collapse. Exercise caution when driving in high debris or flooded areas or when encountering downed power lines. Always be alert to potential hazards and report observed hazards to the Emergency Operations Center and your PDA coordinator. Each site should be itemized individually on a damage assessment form. Since FEMA and your state or tribal representatives will prepare these forms, you don't have to fill them out yourself, but you need to have the information ready for senior officials on a site-by-site basis. If you'd like to use the FEMA forms, you can find them on FEMA.gov. Damage assessment teams should note the following for each site. What is the category of work? What is the location and name of the site? Both address and GPS coordinates are needed. Describe the damages. What are the actual dimensions? In the case of Category B, emergency protective measures, describe what measures were taken. How will the repairs be made? Will the community use its own labor or contract labor to perform the needed work? What percentage of work has been completed? What is the estimated cost of work to be performed? Discuss the impacts to the community. Are bus routes closed or can mail be delivered? What are the economic impacts? Are health and safety factors involved? In cases of severe damage, it may not be possible to document each and every damaged element. For example, hundreds of utility poles may have been knocked down. While it is okay to describe the site as a utility pole down and to project a reasonable number of similar sites, local officials must be certain that they have at least visually inspected those sites. Projections should be grouped geographically. For example, if a county or parish has 100 down utility poles, these could be broken into smaller groups as shown on your screen. Here is an example of a completed site assessment. Category B, site number 3. Location, City Park, note the latitude and longitude. Damages, the Public Works Department worked 64 regular hours and 60 overtime hours, sandbagging city buildings. One vehicle, a 1-ton pickup, was also used for 60 hours. 3,000 pounds of sand and 500 sandbags were purchased and delivered by S&S Company. Impact. Threats of flooding required sandbagging to prevent damage to city buildings. Cost, $40,000. Now let's consider what documentation is required. Since the Public Assistance Program is designed to be a reimbursement program, you should keep careful records of all costs that are disaster-related from the moment the emergency action begins until this emergency action is no longer needed. Retain all of these records for the use during the joint PDA and to support the request for a federal declaration. Continue to document your activities until the event is declared or until all your appeal rights have been exhausted. If a disaster is declared, you will need this documentation to support your project worksheet, which is the funding mechanism for your reimbursement. If you are unsure if the work is eligible, continue to maintain records and seek guidance from your State Emergency Management Office and FEMA. During the response phase of a disaster, emergency actions are being taken and associated costs are being incurred. State, tribal, and local administrative personnel should document these activities, their locations, the personnel and equipment involved, and how many hours were worked. The types of documentation you should maintain are force account labor, or labor performed using your own employees. Labor costs should be supported by an employee's daily time and attendance sheet which identifies the name of the applicant, the location at which the applicant was working, along with the name and the brief description of the work performed. The timesheet should also include the name and title of employee or employees, the dates worked, and the amount of time each employee worked at that location. When recording hours worked, be sure to distinguish between straight time and overtime, since straight time is only eligible for reimbursement in certain circumstances. Note the employee's hourly rate, including fringe benefits. This will help you determine the actual total value of both straight time and overtime worked. You can use your own payroll records to provide this information or FEMA's Form 90-123 shown here. You can read more about eligible labor costs in the PA Digest and PA Guide. You can also review Disaster Assistance Policy 9525.7 Labor Cost Emergency Work. Force account equipment or equipment owned by an eligible applicant used during response and recovery. When any equipment is used, be sure to indicate the name of the employee operating the equipment and how long the equipment was used. This information should correspond with the employee's daily timesheet. Contract cost. Copies of contracts, invoices, paid receipts, evidence of procurement process. In addition, you should keep records of rental cost, maintenance records, and plans, blueprints, and drawings of damaged facilities. It is important to understand what insurance coverage is maintained by an eligible applicant for an eligible facility. Local assessment team members should obtain a copy of relevant insurance policies before FEMA specialists arrive to conduct joint PDAs. While FEMA specialists will note the full damage sustained by the facility, only the cost of unmet needs can be used in the final damage calculations. If a facility is insured, the deductible is often the unmet need. Having an insurance policy available on the day of the joint PDA saves time in the long run. Once you've compiled the results of your initial assessment, you can decide if you will request outside aid for your community. Forward a request to your state or tribal counterpart in accordance with your local procedures. There are several factors you must consider in making that decision. What is the impact on your tax base? If a large number of homes or businesses are destroyed, they may have to be removed from the tax rolls, severely restricting income. Does your budget have sufficient funds to make needed repairs to public property? If not, can you reprioritize non-disaster related projects and use those funds to recover? Are basic utilities operational? Priority must be given to repairing water and sewage facilities. Electricity must be brought back online quickly too. Are local labor forces sufficient to handle all repairs in a reasonable amount of time? It may be feasible to hire extra manual labor if your budget has that flexibility. You may need to consider contracting some projects to local firms. The state or your tribal leaders will schedule the joint PDAs for your community. In preparation for this meeting, advise the state or tribal PDA coordinator of how long it will take to assess your area of responsibility. Keep in mind that it is typical for an entire county or parish to be assessed in only 1 or 2 days. On the designated day, you should participate in the PDA meeting, making note of key issues or known hazards. Have a knowledgeable escort available to show the damages to the PDA team. Separate escorts should be on hand to review individual and public assistance damages if both types of PDAs have been requested. Individual and public assistance teams review different sets of damages and therefore do not travel together. Have an appropriate vehicle or vehicles available that can accommodate several passengers and access the damaged areas. During a PDA, there is always a representative from the state or tribe, a local representative, and a FEMA specialist. On many occasions, there are also other parties involved, such as a public information officer or a representative from the Hazard Mitigation Division. Ask your PDA coordinator for guidance regarding how many people to accommodate. Go over your list of damages and map locations with the PDA team before leaving the PDA briefing. Schedule your travel in a logical way that avoids backtracking while prioritizing hardest hit sites. Be prepared to discuss community-wide impacts, in addition to the dollar amount of damages and the site-specific impacts gathered in the site assessments. Provide the state, tribal, and FEMA specialists with the same answers to the same questions you discussed when requesting the joint PDA. Time is a critical factor in both doing the survey and in asking for assistance. As time passes, repairs will be made and the impact will not be as evident to the state, tribal, and federal specialists. Any request for federal assistance must be processed through the state and received by the Federal Emergency Management Agency within 30 days of the incident. During that time frame, you must do your survey and file your request for assistance. Then, the state must request and conduct joint PDAs and evaluate the data. State officials will recommend whether or not the governor should make a request for the federal declaration. You should also obtain a copy of FEMA 326 Preliminary Damage Assessment Manual. You can request a copy from FEMA Publications by calling the number on your screen. Do this before disaster strikes. Keep in mind that preliminary damage assessment is just that, preliminary. Your survey is an estimate of damage based on the best available information at the time. It would be difficult, if not impossible, to develop exact figures in the time frame involved. Also remember that while the dollar amount of the PDA is a major factor in determining if a disaster is declared, it is not a guarantee of funding. If a disaster is declared, the state, tribe, and FEMA will work together to formulate project worksheets to calculate the exact amount of eligible damages on a project-by-project basis. By thoroughly assessing the damages in advance of a joint PDA and gathering needed documentation, you will be better able to fully illustrate the impact of the event on your community. This will help the state, tribal, and federal inspectors make their recommendation more quickly and accurately.